Thank you so much for inviting me, and I really look forward to the opportunity to share with you what we know about the American mood, the American public opinion on the eve of this presidential election, which, as you know, will take place November 3rd. I've had the great opportunity to present public opinion data in the past to the RIETI in person, actually, which was always great fun and very informative to me. And I hope that you all find this interesting, informative, and provocative in terms of your thinking. So without any further ado, why don't I start this presentation. So what is the current state of US public opinion and the election? One thing that I think all viewers need to understand, and Americans need to understand, is that the American electoral system is becoming increasingly unstable. Change in any democratic system is probably good for the country, where one party rules for a while, then another rules for a while. And that's been the case in the past for the United States. For example, in the 10 elections between 1960 and 1978, change happened in the House, the Senate, and/or the White House 3 times in those 10 elections. But in the next 20 years, 1980 to 1998, change happened 4 times. Not much of a difference, but in the last 20 years, the House, the Senate, or the White House, and/or the White House has changed hands 8 times. This is a sign of growing instability in the political system. I'll leave it up to you whether you think that's good or bad for continuity of policy, but it is certainly a difference from the past. Americans feel very strongly that who wins this election, it's very important who wins this election. 83% in this poll by Pew Research say it's a really important election. Gallup has found 75% say it's a really important election. These are unprecedentedly high numbers, so people are very interested in this outcome. As you know, the president is seeking re-election. One of the polling questions that are asked every month is, do you approve or disapprove of the president's job and how he's doing? In the most recent Gallup survey, his approval was 42%. No president has ever been reelected with an approval rating this low. And bear in mind that he won the election with 47% of the vote. So he's actually polling below his vote total in 2016. Probably even more important for all of us to understand is that the United States is becoming increasingly partisan in its view of the president. It's always been somewhat partisan. Democrats like a Democratic president, Republicans like a Republican president. But currently, the difference between Republican approval of Donald Trump and Democratic approval of Donald Trump is 81 percentage points. This is higher than the partisan divide over Obama. In that case, Republicans didn't like Obama, Democrats did, but the partisan divide was slightly narrower. When George W. Bush was president, there was a partisan divide. It was huge, but it was slightly narrower than it is today. So every 4 years, the partisan divide is getting larger in the United States. One of the most recent polls was a survey by Pew early in October. At that point, Joe Biden had a 52 to 42% lead in the poll for president. This is roughly what he's been polling in the Washington Post or the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, about 10, 12, 14-point lead. What is interesting, I think, for a Japanese audience is that when registered voters were asked, why do you like the candidate you like? For example, do you think he would make good decisions around foreign policy, which obviously might affect Japan? 54% of the public thought Biden would make a good decisions on foreign policy. Only 45% thought Trump would. So Biden has a lead in American public opinion on his conduct of foreign policy if he becomes president. Who is it that supports these two candidates? As you can see, I've circled in red some of the key Trump constituencies. Half of whites support Trump. Roughly half of people over 65 support Trump. Roughly half of people with a high school education or less, so the least educated Americans, support Trump. And also among whites, those with no college degree, 6 in 10 of those support Trump. So his support is strongest actually among lowly educated whites. Biden, on the other hand, is strongly supported by Blacks. Probably no surprise for those of you who know the United States politics. 75% of Asians also support Biden. And Biden is particularly popular among people with more than a college education, postgraduate education. One of the things that is a question mark that we won't know until the day after the election. Donald Trump won the 2016 election because he was able to get people who had never voted or had not voted for many, many years to come out and vote for maybe the first time in their life, and they voted for him. And that increase in getting new people to the polls was the reason he won in the key battleground states such as Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So an analysis has been done of how many more of those people are out there, because Donald Trump has focused for the last 4 years purely in satisfying his base voter, his base of support, which, as you could see in one of the previous slides, was only 42%. And many people have pondered, why is he doing this? You have to grow your base to win. Well, he's doubling down on trying to increase his base by getting people who haven't voted even in 2016 to vote in 2020. What's interesting is in some of the key battleground states, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, if you count up the non-college educated whites, the lowly educated whites who did not vote in 2016, there are more of them than there are college educated whites or non-white people who didn't vote in 2016. So at the end of the day, this election will be about, does Donald Trump repeat what he did in 2016 and get new voters to come and vote, and they'll vote for him? Or is Joe Biden successful in getting some of the college whites who didn't vote to vote, some of the non-whites to vote, and the thinking is they will vote for him? But if Biden and Trump are equally successful in these key states, Trump will win because he will turn out more of his people than Biden turns out of his people. Now, Biden is not totally lost. There are more of his likely voters in Arizona, in Florida, in Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. And for those of you who've been following the election, some of these states might in fact end up being in the Biden camp, Arizona in particular, maybe North Carolina. So it is going to be a test of who turns out their voters. As you know, America is increasingly demographically divided, and as I pointed out before, a highly partisan electorate. So who supports whom in this demographically divided, partisan divided America? As you can see from this recent survey from the Pew Research Center, Donald Trump enjoys a huge advantage among white evangelical Protestants. 78% of those support Trump, only 17% support Biden, and they represent 18% of the population. Trump also enjoys strong support, 62% to 30%, among white men who lack a college education, and they represent 22% of the population. Biden, on the other hand, is particularly strong among white women who have at least a college education, and in some cases more than a college education. They only represent 13% of the electorate, but Biden has a 28 percentage point advantage among that group. So who people are likely to vote for is really ascertained, or can be determined almost, by what racial or educational group they belong to. As many of you know, the United States is becoming increasingly a minority majority population, and will eventually be there'll be more minorities than white majority, the current white majority. But I think even Americans don't appreciate how fast this is happening. The non-white population in the United States has grown by 76% since 2000. And that includes a 14% increase among Asian Americans. Whites have grown by 24%. The population continues to grow, but the non-white population is growing 3 times as fast as the white population. As you can see, this is of critical political importance in certain key states. In Florida, the white percentage of the population has fallen 13 percentage points since 2000. In Arizona, it's fallen 12 percentage points. In both cases, that's largely because of the growing Hispanic population. In Pennsylvania, the white population has fallen by 7 percentage points. I'm from Pennsylvania. There are Black people who live in my county that weren't there when I was growing up. So the composition of the society is changing, and that does have an effect on how the voting outcome happens. But it all depends on what party people identify with. As you can see, white people are still more likely in the United States to identify with the Republican Party by 11 percentage points over the Democratic Party. But Blacks overwhelmingly retain a loyalty to the Democratic Party. The Republican Party has not been able to make an inroads in that group for a generation. Asians are increasingly Democratic. They were in 1995, about half of Asians were voting Democrat. Now almost 3/4 self-identify as Democrats. But at the end of the day, whatever the loyalty of various racial groups may be to various parties, all that really matters is who shows up to vote on election day or mails in their ballot ahead of election day. And what is still prevalent in the United States is that 2/3 of white people vote in any given election. The percentage of Black people who vote was at 2/3. It's now fallen down in the last presidential election to 60%. One of the key challenges the Biden campaign has is to increase voter participation by Blacks. That fall off in Black voter participation is one of the reasons Hillary Clinton lost. And as you can see, Hispanics and Asians still vote at less than a 50% rate. A second issue, as you think about who actually votes, is by age group. And as you can see, the baby boomer generation, which is my cohort, but also people slightly older than me, the silent generation, we both vote at about a 2/3 rate. Gen Z, which is the youngest generation, and has only had really one election to participate in 2018, only 30% of those people vote. So when you read in the newspapers that young people support Biden more than they do Trump, you have to remember that young people in America don't vote. And even though millennials have increased their voter participation between 2014 and 2018 by 20 percentage points, which is a huge jump in a 4-year period, they are still 20 percentage points below the baby boomer generation. So there's still a long, long way to go for younger people to influence the outcome of an election the way older generations do. So how do Americans feel about various issues that confront the nation as they go into this election? Because that will have an impact on the demands they may make on whoever wins and what course he might take. Many of you know there's an old saying in American politics, it's the economy stupid. And certainly one measure of that is, and suggests it's accurate, is that if you look at presidents trying to get reelected, those who faced no recession in the 2 years before their reelection campaign all won. Among those presidents seeking reelection who had experienced a recession within 2 years of the reelection campaign, all but one of them lost. The only one who actually won reelection in the wake of a recession was Calvin Coolidge in 1924. So since the United States has experienced a very severe recession under Donald Trump, if it is the economy stupid, then this data would suggest, history would suggest that he's in real trouble. One of the things that pollsters look at and politicians look at is how do people feel about the economy on the eve of the election. As you can see, there was a stiff drop-off of attitudes among all Americans once the recession began. Totally understandable. But it's begun to rebound a little bit. Certainly rebounded significantly among Republicans. 57% of Republicans now say the national economic condition is excellent or good, but only 13% of Democrats say it's excellent or good. It's highly partisan, but I'll leave it to you to decide whether the American economy is excellent or good. When asked about various issues and what's important to them as they go to vote, overwhelmingly, people, 79% of people say that the economy is very important to them. So again, it is the economy stupid. Healthcare is very close in that regard, as is the coronavirus. Notice that foreign policy, 57% of people say foreign policy is very important as they consider how to vote. I would caution you, though, that this question is a three-part question. Is it very important, a four-part, I'm sorry, very important, somewhat important, not so important, not important at all. And my experience of 10 years as a pollster is that if you ask people if something is very important, they tend to say it is, because all things are very important. As you can see, most things, over half the population say it's very important. So what's useful in assessing what's important to voters is the relative importance of things. And foreign policy is somewhat in the middle in terms of people's what they view as important. Notice that only 42% of Americans say climate change is very important in this election. So it's probably more informative to look at what excites Trump supporters and what excites Biden supporters as they think about voting. As you can see, 7 in 10 Biden supporters and almost 9 in 10 Trump supporters say the economy is very important. But given that previous slide where we talked about the difference in the assessment of the economy, I think one can presume that Trump supporters say it's very important because they think it's doing well, and Biden supporters say it's very important because it's not doing well. What is interesting on foreign policy is that Biden supporters and Trump supporters both have the same importance accorded to foreign policy. There's no real difference there. And look down at the bottom of this list, climate change. 7 in 10 Biden supporters say that climate change is very important. Only 11%, 1 in 10, Trump supporters think climate change is very important to their vote. So there's a real difference on one of those very important international issues. Another way to look at this, which the Pew Research Center has done, is they've asked people questions, the public questions, about various international issues. And the one that I thought might be of most interest is question number 2, where they ask people, should the United States take into account the interest of other countries, even if it means making compromises with them? 78% of Biden supporters or Democrats say, yes, we should make compromises with other countries. Only 31% of Republicans believe that. So there's a huge difference. By almost 2 to 1, Democrats are more willing to compromise with foreign countries than are Republicans, which, if Biden is elected, would give him some public support for being more cooperative internationally. The Chicago Council on International Affairs in Chicago did a survey recently that looked more specifically at some foreign policy issues that face the United States and asked the voters how they felt about them. This is a slide that shows whether Republicans say we need more of a particular policy, the same amount, or less of that particular policy. And I wanted to highlight for you 3 policy issues where you could see real differences. When asked, should we place more tariffs on other countries' goods, 43% of Republicans said, yes, we should place more tariffs on other countries' goods. Only 13% said we should place fewer tariffs on other countries' goods. So by 3 to 1, Republicans want more tariffs on foreign products. Ask whether they should sign free trade agreements with other countries. About a third said yes, which is interesting, but about half said keep it about the same. On the question of defending our allies' security, should we defend our allies' security? What is interesting is that half of the Republicans who answered that question said, no, keep it about the same. What could be reassuring is that only 18% said we should do less of the defense of other countries. Now, these are Republicans. If you look at Democrats answering the same question, by 4 to 1, Democrats said sign more free trade agreements with other countries. Again, possibly giving Biden some support for some international initiatives. By 3 to 1, Democrats said we should do more than now in defending our allies' security. Again, much stronger support for doing more to support our allies than the Republicans said. And finally, on placing tariffs against other countries, by 3 to 1, Democrats said, no, we should actually do less of that, not more. And so there are some real differences among some key foreign policy issues between Democrats and Republicans. What about trade in particular? Obviously a major issue for a Japanese audience. Americans increasingly think trade is good for the country. Gone are the days when the American public was knee-jerk protectionist. In general, the public believes in this Gallup poll, 8 in 10 believe the trade is good for the country. The Pew Research Center has found it to be maybe 7 in 10. So it is, things are going in the right direction in terms of foreign trade. On China, they're going in the wrong direction. This is a slide showing the unfavorable opinion of China. It has never been higher in recent history, both among Republicans and Democrats. So even if Joe Biden is elected, and one might expect that there would be a softer line on China, 68% of Democrats in the United States have an unfavorable view of China. However, when you ask the question differently, do you say, is it more important to get tougher with China than to build a strong relationship with China on economic issues? 66% of Republicans say, no, we should get tougher with China, even if it hurts the economy. Only 33% of Democrats say that. So there's a real difference here on what kind of policies have support if Trump is reelected or if Biden is reelected in terms of dealing with China. But notice also that last item, there is almost equal support. 7 in 10 Republicans, 8 in 10 Democrats say we should promote human rights in China, even if it harms economic relations. So a tougher line on human rights in China is supported by both Republicans and Democrats, even at the cost of economic relations. Finally, what should we expect on Election Day? For those of you who follow the election, you know the predictions are for a tumultuous Election Day and possibly many days after that. This is a question by Gallup asking people, are they confident in the accuracy of US elections? And notice that as recently as 2018, a majority of Republicans and Democrats believed in the accuracy of US elections. Now it's about 3/4 of Democrats believe that, but only 4 in 10 Republicans. What happened between 2018 and 2020? I submit to you that it's the president who has, through Twitter and through speeches and newspaper and television interviews, has been raising doubts about the accuracy of US elections. And Republicans hear that and they have responded. As many of you know, in the United States, you can vote on Election Day, which is historically the way we've always voted. You can also vote by mail, or you can vote now even before the Election Day in many states. As I said in this Pew survey, Biden leads Trump by 10 points, 52 to 42. That data is about a week old. But if you ask, how are you going to vote of these same people? A majority of Biden supporters say they will vote in person before Election Day. 69% of them say they will vote by mail. And meanwhile, 63% of Trump supporters say they will vote on Election Day. So one of the things for those of you who will be watching the election results should realize that on election night, it's highly likely that Trump will be ahead in some states because his supporters voted on Election Day, and Biden will be behind in part because in the American system, in most states, mail-in votes are not counted until the polls close on Election Day. And so we'll have a same-day voting count. We'll have a count of the people who voted on Election Day because this is done by machine and is instantaneously known. But mail-in ballots have to be counted largely by hand. And so what we may have is a situation where Trump is ahead on election night, and that lead begins to erode as the mail-in ballots are counted. Whether there will be enough to overturn Trump's lead on election night, no one knows. But that is probably going to be one of the real tensions in the election. As many of you may also know, there's been a big fight in the United States about uh, voter suppression, about the difficulty of some people voting in the early voting in Georgia in this election. In Black neighborhoods, people were standing in line for 10 hours sometimes. In white neighborhoods, they were standing in line for 1 or 2 hours. And so there is some concern whether it would be difficult to vote in this year's election. This question has been asked before, and what is, I think, disturbing is that in 2018, only 15% of all voters said they thought it would be difficult to vote on election day. That total has tripled, and now 49% of Americans think it will be difficult to vote on election day. So the public is basically divided. And what's interesting is that only 35% of Republicans think it's going to be difficult to vote, but it's 60% of Democrats who say that. But notice that both Republicans and Democrats increasingly think it may be difficult to vote. There's also been allegations by the Republicans almost exclusively that there will be a great deal of voter fraud. And in fact, has been in past elections a great deal of voter fraud. What I think our Japanese friends should understand is that in over 20 states, Republicans have tried to challenge voting processes alleging fraud, and they have not won a single case. The judges in every situation have said, you assert fraud, but you haven't proven it. The studies of fraud in American elections show that out of the billions of votes that have been cast since World War II ended, the percentage of fraudulent votes is something on the order of 0.000337%. It is not even a rounding error. Nevertheless, if you get your news from Fox News, 61% of Republicans believe fraud is a major issue. If you get your news from a liberal news source like MSNBC or the New York Times or the Washington Post, only 4% think it's a major problem. So again, this is another sign of the divisions in the United States, even in our news sources, and what impact that has on people's perception of this upcoming election. Finally, and probably the most troubling question is, will there be trouble in the United States on election day or immediately after election day? And I think what is disturbing from this survey, which was done by ABC News and the Washington Post, is they ask people who said they would not vote for Trump. In other words, they were going to vote for Biden mostly. They ask them, if Trump wins, will there be a crisis? 59% of people who don't vote for Trump, who say they are not going to vote for Trump, expect a crisis after the election. And 50% of those who say they aren't going to vote for Biden, they're going to vote for Trump probably, expect a crisis. So both partisans on both sides of the aisle in the United States expect a crisis after the election, where there's no way to know if there will be a crisis, but this is one very sobering outcome that many people expect. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And we can know in a few days who actually has won the election, although, as I must say, and we all say to each other in America these days, don't expect to know on election night who won. It may take days or weeks. Thank you.